In this lecture, we're going to talk about a couple different types of taxes and the idea of the Laffer curve. So this is in chapter 4. It's not section 3.5. That's actually section 4.5. There we go. Let's correct that. All right, moving on. So types of taxes. There's really three kind of broad types of taxes. Okay. The first, the ones called progressive taxes, are the types of taxes that essentially the percentage tax rate rises as you make more money. So a progressive tax is one where the tax rate increases with income. So for example, our income tax rate, so an example of this would be an income tax, right? So what this means again is this is the tax rate increases with income, right? So you can have a flat tax, and a flat tax is not a progressive tax because the tax rate isn't going up as your income is going up. Now, with a flat tax, if you make more money, you do pay more in taxes, but your tax rate remains the same. A progressive tax rate is one where the tax rate increases with your income. And the U.S. income tax is an example of this. Most income taxes for states or U.S. or other countries are a progressive tax. Now, the second type of tax is a regressive tax. And this is essentially the opposite, where the tax rate decreases with income. So this is where the tax rate decreases with income. And I should say with, put a little caret in here, increases in income. And I'll put it up here, increases in income, right? So as your income goes up on a progressive tax, your tax rate goes up. On a regressive tax, if your income goes up, the tax rate actually decreases. An actually example of this, there's not a lot of them, because most people don't put these types of tax rates in because they generally view them as unfair, but that's debatable. Actually, the payroll tax for Social Security, payroll tax, is an example of a regressive tax because essentially it's capped when you reach a certain amount of income. So the high income earners, in terms of percentage of their income that they pay for the payroll tax, it's actually less than lower income earners. So that would be an example of a regressive tax. And lastly is a proportional tax. This means it's the same rate across all incomes. Right? So it is the same rate across all incomes. Now, an example of this would be a flat tax. That is, everybody pays the exact same rate, right? So some flat tax, right? So some European countries actually have this. Russia had this for a little bit. They may still have it. A lot of the the Baltic countries have flat taxes. I think the country of Georgia has flat tax as well. So those are the three types of taxes. Progressive is where the tax rate rises as your income rises. Regressive is where the tax rate actually decreases as your income increases. And proportional are ones where it stays the same across all income types. Okay. Now the second taxation concept we're going to cover, and we're going to do it now, is called the Laffer curve. It's actually an idea that was formulated by a guy named Art Laffer. He's actually still alive, so maybe he's our first living economist. And this idea of the Laffer curve, has to do with the relationship between tax rates and tax revenue. Okay, so that's essentially what the Laffer curve is. We'll draw it on the next slide, but really it's getting at the relationship between the rate of taxation and how much revenue that generates for the government. Okay, so that's what the Laffer curve is getting at. Okay, so let's draw it. Now, the way we've got it drawn here, we have, or I haven't drawn it yet, but I have the tax rate on the horizontal axis, and I have essentially the tax revenue, and again, this is for the government, on the vertical axis. Okay, so occasionally you might see this drawn, and maybe the homework does this, it shouldn't. Anyway, the book usually has it this way, but occasionally you might see it where these axes are flipped. That is, the tax rate is on the vertical axis and tax revenue is on the horizontal axis. Okay, it really doesn't matter, so if you see it flipped, it's not that big of a deal, so just be aware of that. Okay, but for us here, we've got tax rate, so it spans from all the way down to 0%, that means no tax, all the way up to 100%, that means everything is taxed. Okay, and in the tax rate is 100, which means the government takes everything. Okay, and on the vertical axis, we've got the amount of tax revenue that the government generates when they have a particular tax rate. Okay, so let's start with a simple example. Suppose the government institutes a tax rate of 0%. That'd be nice. So the question is, how much revenue does the government get if it has a tax of 0%? Well, this one's kind of easy. They get zero revenue, right? So they get nothing. With the tax rate of 0%, they don't get any money, okay? All right, so essentially what we're doing is we're piecing together what this curve is going to look like. So let's go to the opposite extreme. All right, let's go over here to 100%. That is, the tax rate is 100%. So when you make, $60,000, $70,000 a year, the government takes all $60,000, $70,000. They take it all. Right? Now, many of you might be thinking, well, in terms of tax revenue, they're going to get a ton of money, right? Because tax revenue, if they take 100%, they take it all, man, they get the entire economy. Right? And here's the inside of the Laffer curve. Because the Laffer curve says, okay, let's take into account human behavior. Suppose the government does have a 100% tax rate, and you work all day, and 100% of everything you earn goes to the government. The follow-up question is, how much are you actually going to work, right? If everything you work for is taken from you, most of you, in fact, probably all of you are going to say, yeah, not really going to go to work, okay? So that means if the tax rate is 100%, the government also gets zero revenue. So our Laffer curve has to start over here at 0%, at zero, and end over here at 100% at a tax revenue of zero. Right? And so this is why the Laffer curve actually looks something like this. It's essentially an upside down parabola. So it's basically an upside down U shape that does something like this. See if I can draw this nicely. The other side is harder to draw. So it's gonna be nasty. Okay, that's not very clean and neat, but whatever. Right, and there's some maximum level here. So max revenue is here, okay? So this was our Laffer's idea, the Laffer curve. And what it illustrates is that on this side, right, we can put just put a dashed line in here, down here, right? On this side of the Laffer curve, over here, right, when you increase tax rates, you also increase tax revenue. And the idea is that, okay, your tax rates are going up, however, they're not that high, so there's still a high incentive to work and to earn, right? And you still keep working, right? But at some point, when the tax rate gets high enough, say around here, right, it starts to become a disincentive to work. And so you kind of start telling yourself, well, I'm not going to work overtime anymore because, the government takes too much of it or something like that, right? Or maybe you don't work a second job, or you don't do the night shift or something like that, right? So at some point, if the tax rate gets too high, right, and you're over on this side, this is where you increase tax rates. And you decrease the tax revenue. Okay? So what this means is over here on the right-hand side, right, is that you are increasing the tax rates that they're so high that it's becoming less and less of an incentive for people to work, right? People will work less, they'll work shorter hours, etc. And that's what essentially the Laffer curve is illustrating, right? So at some point, you can raise taxes to a point where you're actually going to be counterproductive if you're trying to generate revenue for the government, because you're now creating a disincentive to work, right? So this is the idea of the Laffer curve that Art Laffer came up with, okay? So this slide here is kind of a summary, right? It's illustrating there is a trade-off between taxes and the amount of revenue a government creates, right? So higher taxes lead to more government revenue, but up to a point, right? At some point, we reach that higher level where the high taxes on labor become a disincentive to work, right? And therefore people work less, generate less income, the government gets less in taxes, right? So that would mean that at some point on the Laffer curve, over on the right-hand side, the government doesn't increase revenue as much. Right? So that's the idea of the Laffer curve, is this essentially trade-off between taxes and revenue, and if taxes get high enough, they become a disincentive for people to work. Right? And that's the end of this video.